Hello and welcome to Libero episode 25, the podcast about the most important of the least important things, as Carlo Ancelotti put it. Now, before we begin, if we just take a moment to ask you to please rate, review and recommend us. It really helps and we really appreciate it. All comments and reviews are especially helpful, whether that's on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, whatever. And word of mouth is always really useful as well. So maybe you're in the queue at Cafe Nero, maybe you're visiting your nan at the old people's home, maybe just waiting for a bus, but tell all the people all about you, all about us. I'm Jonathan Wilson. I'm joined today by Tariq Panja, who I seem to be on with a lot these days. His sound's not as good as normal though, so he apologises for that. And if you're watching on YouTube, he seems a long way away, but he's actually just really small. So that's just a perspective thing. And also joined by James Horncastle, who is about to dash off to Miami for the Club World Cup, which he's really looking forward to. So James, should we start with you? We're going to talk about the weekend's football, internationals. We'll get on to the Nations League, which is what we were going to talk about. But what on earth is going on with Luciano Spalletti in Italy? Italy lose 3-0 to Norway. He appears to be sacked, but then just turns up George Costanza style and is going to do the game as Moldova anyway and hope nobody's noticed. Is that right?
Yeah, that is right. I mean, I'm going to Miami, Jonathan, because, I might not be going to America next year when Italy failed to qualify for a third consecutive World Cup. This ultimately comes after they lost in Oslo 3-0 against Norway in their first World Cup qualifier. They were 3-0 down at half-time. It's not the first time that's happened under Spalletti. They were 3-0 down at half-time against Germany in the Nations League quarterfinal in March. And, I suppose a lot of people thought that Spalletti should have gone already this time last year when they were eliminated from the Euros against Switzerland in the round of 16 after a really insipid performance. But the Italian Football Federation at the time recognised that he'd only been in the job like 7 or 8 months because Roberto Mancini had basically come up with an excuse to resign, saying that, the Italian Football Federation have been meddling with my coaching staff. And then he just magicked up this offer from Saudi Arabia for €25 million a year. So, Spalletti basically came in when he was supposed to be on sabbatical. Pretty tense situation. Remember, Italy had lost to England in the group and were kind of not going to finish top of the group. So it became between them and Ukraine. And then he kind of, I suppose, his own ego said, if you wanted me to do this job, it's because you want me to play my style of play. So I'm going to do that regardless of the players I've got available. Spain wiped the floor of them in the Euros group, and Italy have never really recovered since then. Their confidence was shattered. Played pretty well at the beginning of the Nations League back in autumn. They beat France for the first time in like 70 years in Paris, and everyone thought that was the start of Spalletti's Italy. And instead it wasn't. He's a genius, but with that genius comes moments where he falls out with people. And that was no different going into this round of internationals where Francesco Acerbi, the Inter centre-back, basically ghosted him, didn't respond to a call-up. Spalletti in his first press conference said, Acerbi's ignored me. Acerbi then took to social media. Roberto Mancini liked Acerbi's Instagram post, it's a problem when your team has a lot of Inter players in it. If you end up taking on a very big name Inter player, so I think that's ultimately why the Italian Football Federation said, "Thank you, Luciano, but it's just not working."
I mean, Tariq, this.
They changed the locks or something, or the entry card. Like, he has been sacked, but is going to go to the dressing room. Do they know he's coming? Well, he's told them he's coming. What's going on in terms of a man who's been sacked coaching the team on Wednesday or whatever?
Well, the bizarre thing is, usually when a football federation sacks a manager, the president of the football federation basically holds a press conference and explains his decision. And, on Sunday, the president of the Italian Football Federation, a guy called Gabriele Gravina, who sort of anyone who's read The Miracle of Castel di Sangro will be maybe familiar with Gravina. He appeared at this kind of Serie A Festival della Serie A. Spoke to the media, said, Spalletti's a gentleman, he's such a noble soul, he's extraordinary, he's the best person I've ever worked with in football, and then walks away. No one's any the wiser. No one thinks that Spalletti's been sacked. I kind of approached Spalletti's press conference as though he's going to continue, and then no, in the hour before that press conference, there were reports in Italy that he'd resigned. And then he basically came out and said, no, I haven't resigned. I was sacked last night. Great training session this afternoon.
So weird.
But I mean, Tariq, this just feels, I'm guessing you're in a similar position to me. As an outsider, a World Cup without Italy is weird. They're one of the countries you want. It doesn't matter how ordinary this generation is by the comparison to previous generations. Italy at a World Cup is a thing you want to see. And I don't know if I sort of underestimated the crisis of 2018 because they went and won the Euros, 2021 by the time they won it. But it just feels wrong, a World Cup without Italy, doesn't it?
Yeah, for us, and we're north of 40s, pretty much. Maybe not you, Horny, but for our generation, I wonder for younger kids though, it might not feel so weird. But yeah, for me, absolutely. Texture of a World Cup has an Italy in it. But if you think about their performances as well, even when they've been in, so 2006 they won the World Cup. Then in South Africa, I think they had like 3-0 draws or something like that. Brazil, I remember. What was it? It was the Balotelli. They were in the group with England, Uruguay, and
Costa Rica.
Costa Rica, yeah. No great chance. They didn't make it through the group stage, or you can correct me there. But
No,
they haven't been very good for a long time, have they?
Yeah, it's interesting because they have this sort of Jekyll and Hyde, I suppose, in that World Cup really bad. As you mentioned, they haven't played in the World Cup since sort of Balotelli was taken off at half time, I think in Recife against Uruguay, and sort of everyone was blaming Balotelli for being a bit reckless and compromising things, even though Claudio Marchisio, kind of this golden boy of kind of Turin establishment football, had been sent off in that game. But the thing is, like, their European Championship record in this time has actually been pretty good. I mean, they overperformed and reached the final in 2012. And then sort of did what Inter did in the Champions League final last week and got absolutely destroyed by Spain. But, had done really well to get to that final. Everyone remembers the Balotelli performance against Germany. 2016, I remember going into that tournament thinking, this is the worst Italy squad since the one that had to go to the 1950 World Cup without the Grande Torino team, which had been lost in the Superga air disaster. And they played magnificently against Spain in that tournament. Unlucky to lose to Germany on penalties. Remember those terrible spot kicks by Graziano Pelle and Simone Zaza. I think Italy believed they could have gone all the way in that tournament were it not for those penalties. And then of course in 2020, 2021, they win the thing. And up until the semi-final against Spain, played a style of football which was kind of seen as countercultural. It was very much about dominating possession, pressing, really good midfield of Verratti, Barella, and Jorginho. And so you've got this flip side, sort of, let's ignore last summer's European Championship, but very good in the Euros, not at the World Cup. It means it's actually really difficult for Italian football to reset itself because just when they think things are really bad and they've hit rock bottom, they kind of surprise themselves 2 years later by doing well at the Euros. At the moment, you've got this kind of faint renaissance going on in terms of European football where Italian clubs are reaching finals. So they're like, everything's okay, Inter have been to 2 Champions League finals in the last 3 years. Fiorentina have reached 2 Conference League finals, Roma Conference League final, Europa League final. Atalanta won the UEFA Cup last year. But fundamentally, the Italian national team is, it's not that it lacks talent, but it's not what it was, in terms of producing that genuine elite talent where you can see that they have some of the best players in the world in their positions. apart from maybe Donnarumma, who else is there? And so yeah, it's a complicated story.
I guess there is maybe a sense that they've been a little bit unlucky with the draw in that Norway are there's probably no team who are so much better than their coefficient would suggest than Norway. That in Norway are a team that, because of just the population in Norway, there's going to be ups and downs. And they've been on a down. Obviously, they've got Holland, they've got Odegaard, they've got Oscar Bob. Yeah, they've got good players coming through. Maybe not a team of them, but enough that they can put on good performances. They can hurt teams. And so if you're going into that game lacking a bit of confidence, lacking a bit of rhythm, and suddenly you run into Norway clicking, it maybe looks worse. I mean, England had the same thing with Norway in '94, right? Suddenly they got the good Norwegian generation out of that 5 or 6 generations, and it cost them a place at the World Cup. And Italy possibly are in the same position now. So
yeah,
there's an element of misfortune there, maybe.
There is. They are in this kind of vicious cycle, really, and I mean, it's hard to know how much sympathy you should have for them, because out of that 2014 World Cup, where they, as Tariq said, go out in the group stages, yeah, their ranking was really affected by that. They lost their seeding, and it meant that they went into the next World Cup qualifiers with Spain being in their group. And yeah, that is ultimately what leads to Italy playing that playoff against Sweden, which they should have still had enough to beat Sweden in that playoff. But the kind of Italy had everything to lose going into that. Sweden had everything to gain. And the kind of scrutiny and pressure that comes with playing for Italy is such that, as we saw against North Macedonia a few years ago, it gets on top of them. And you get these dramatic upsets, which we're now at the stage where this is becoming almost self-fulfilling, where they're beginning to really doubt themselves going into qualifying campaigns, thinking it's actually harder than it really is. And that's the strange thing, because the knee-jerk thing to say on social media is, well, there are no Baccios, no Tottis, no Del Pieros, and that sort of thing. Italy does still produce a high quality of player, maybe not players who are in the top 10 Ballon d'Or list, players. For example, if you look at their recent record in youth tournaments, they're the current under-17 European champions. Brentford signed the guy Kayode, who scored the winner in that final. They're the current under-19 European champions. They reached the final of the under-20 World Cup. Some of these players have come to the Premier League. Chelsea signed Casadei. Casadei is now back in Italy with Torino. And Spalletti was, after they missed out on the Euros last year, he was encouraging players to move to the Premier League. So Calafiori went, Chiesa went. Chiesa was the player that everyone thought was going to be the big hope for this new generation of the national team. And, I think if he wasn't called Chiesa and didn't have a famous dad, people would maybe view him for what he is, which is, if you go back 4 years ago to that European Championship, he was not the starting right winger. The starting right winger was a guy called Domenico Berardi. And Chiesa had 2 massive moments in that Euros. He scored in extra time against Austria and scored the crucial goal against Luis Enrique's Spain. And 6 months later, did his ACL, not really been the same player since. And I think started maybe 1 game for Liverpool in the Premier League this season. So again, a little bit of misfortune there, really.
Should we move on from Italy to the main event of the weekend, which absolutely was not Andorra 0, England 1. It's the first England game I've covered since 2010 that wasn't a semi-final or a final, and I really pray it's 15 years I'll have to do another one. But anyway, the main event, I think probably was the Nations League. But actually, maybe that is the opening question. Was the Nations League final the main event of the weekend?
I thought that game, the final, Spain, Portugal, and Munich, it had an air of a big game for the teams as well. You saw how they approached the game. You saw the backdrop, the Munich stadium packed to the rafters there. the game itself was full-blooded. There was needle in it as well. It was incredible football, but they really wanted to win. I guess exemplified by Ronaldo crying when they won the thing. But I guess Ronaldo does cry whenever whenever he's won a trophy or his team is about to win a trophy. But it had a big game feel. It felt like it had arrived. Certainly for me watching it. Maybe it arrived in other countries before in England. Watching it in England and the English public is a bit late to the competition. But it was something these teams really wanted to win. I felt it did. It was the main event of the weekend for sure.
But okay, so I've got two questions, and either of you can answer this. A, what does the trophy look like? And B, who won it before? Who were the defending champions?
Well, Jonathan, I mean, the interesting thing with this is that the way Ronaldo was crying last night, you would have thought it was the first time Portugal had won it. But no, they'd won it in 2019. It's the second time. They are the most successful Nations League nation. They dominate the Nations League. I can't tell you what the trophy looks like. I think it sort of looks like a man of the match award rather than an actual trophy.
Quite slim.
Yeah.
Like a scepter.
Exactly. And then I think Spain won it last time. And I only say this because Italy, again, everyone kind of focuses on the fact that they don't make World Cups anymore. And I mentioned their record in European Championships as the counterpoint. But they've reached the last two Final Fours of the Nations League last year and I think 2 years before that. But they came up short. And I think Spain did win last time. Did they? Is that right?
I don't know.
I think you're right. But again, we're talking, I think we're still in England, all three of us. And again, as I say, we're quite late to the party. So maybe there is. But honestly, you'll watch the game, I hope, and the intensity of that match and like the furious reaction from the players over minor refereeing decisions suggested like they really wanted to win this thing. And I did watch the trophy celebration, so I saw what this thing looked like. And honestly, in terms of the way each of these teams performed and the players on the pitch, don't forget some of them played in the Champions League final on the same field a week before. I didn't see any let up in the intensity of what I watched in the Nations League final. I did in Champions League final from these guys a week before. Plus the benches, all of it had a big game feel.
I just worry that it gets a bit lost because of the timing. I mean, I think partly, this is something Thomas Tuchel was talking about a lot on Saturday, and I guess maybe he had a vested interest in describing it like this. But he sort of says that as a club coach, he hated the June international break. As an international coach, he hates the June international break. Everybody's exhausted. Nothing feels quite real. Nobody's head is in the right space. They're either, some of them have been on holiday and had to come back. Some of them have just lost in the Champions League final or won the Champions League final, having to readjust. Some of them are thinking, oh God, in a week I'll be playing against Al Ahly in Miami or whatever. That it just doesn't have its space in the calendar. And in my sense of it is it's a very good idea that unfortunately is running into the basic issues of the football calendar being too full. And the fact that these games, Germany v Portugal, Spain v France in the semi-finals, I would like that to be isolated on its own so I could pay it full attention rather than happening at the same time as World Cup qualifiers. And I totally take the point you make, Tariq, that maybe this is a British thing, that maybe if we were consuming this elsewhere, it would be promoted in a different way. But as far as I can tell, the semi-finals were on Amazon Prime, but you had to pay an extra £2.49 to watch it. And by the time I'd worked it out, the game was finished. So, it wasn't inaccessible, but it wasn't sort of easy to get to. And it sort of feels a bit of a shame that it is lost in this sort of end of season mess. And I wonder even if that 5-4 in the semi-final was a result of that. That, I don't know. Again, players not almost an end of term feel, people not quite taking their responsibilities as seriously as they would have done, or just being exhausted.
I was in the same boat as you. I was desperately trying to find this game on telly when I was seeing the sort of numbers rack up because I want to watch a 5-4. To be fair, whether they're taking it seriously. It just looked quite. So I couldn't find it until I think we were WhatsApping. We found out it was on Amazon Prime. You got to pay $2.49. That's part of the problem with in terms of the broadcasting agreement. And to be honest, the calendar issue is also it's so significant here. Arsene Wenger had a couple of years ago. He was trying to tasked with fixing the international football calendar, which is an impossible job. It seems like FIFA had tasked him to do this. He works for FIFA now, and his idea was. I think I'm into this as well. It was two windows because I couldn't tell you when the international windows are. I couldn't I should do because we work in this sector, but it just seems to surprise me every time that look, there's an international break, and I think if international football had two, I'd like one to be honest, but two distinct windows, you can follow a narrative arc as well for these stories to manage. If teams are playing each other, the needle builds. You're following the table, and the stories emerge from it, and we like that. The reason it didn't happen is money. To be honest, the leagues and the clubs, on one hand, were saying it's going to disrupt. It's going to take attention away from their competitions if the gap is too big. And the broadcasters, they said, we don't want too many international games all bunched together because it reduces the rights value for us, apparently. Now, and here we are again. It isn't. I'm not sure it's a footballing reason why this Wenger idea didn't happen. You could say maybe some of the players who aren't picked for national teams will have nothing to do, maybe, or for a long time that might be one of the reasons. But yeah, if there was a rational calendar and this thing was in it, I think it's great. These are competitive matches.
And the Nations League generally, James. I mean, do you think it's a? I mean, it seems to me a good thing. Tariq thinks it's a good thing. You also think it's a good thing?
Although I just don't think it changes perceptions of teams. I mean, I think we had this kind of almost glancing at it and then trying to watch it and maybe then succeeding to watch it. Because it did look over the last week that it threw up some really entertaining games. That 5-4 between Spain and France. You want to see Lamine Yamal. You want to see these players kick on again. I still don't think we will be judging Roberto Martinez as like a success at Portugal on the basis that he's won the Nations League, as much as he probably rightfully says, look, I've moved this national team on. This is good going into the World Cup next year, blah, blah, blah. I think unless you were following Spain, embedded in Spain and being a Spanish reporter, you probably wouldn't have read a lot of Spain winning the Euros if they did win the Euros, if they did win the Nations League going into the Euros last year, as to whether that was significant in them going and creating a winning mentality to then win the Euros, if that makes sense. And then the other thing I suppose to say is, let's not just measure the success of this competition on the basis of the elite. Like the whole point of this was also to sort of allow smaller teams the chance to grow and develop. And look, I think there are, I was glancing through this in terms of like the number of teams that have got promoted from like Group C to Group B to Group A. And to be honest, that like the Czech Republic have done that. So the Czechs are kind of bouncing back. Greeks are doing it as well. I think the Greeks will be in Group A. They seem to have a good generation. Whether that's just a point, whether that's just a quirk that these national teams are growing anyway because of the generation of players that are coming through, it's got nothing to do with this new format. I don't know. So we've seen San Marino start winning games for the first time because they're actually drawn in groups where they have a puncher's chance of actually getting results.
I think that is a big thing, isn't it? It maybe matters less at the top end where, I'm sure Portugal would happily trade their two Nations Leagues for Euros. But if North Macedonia, I think, are a team who've clearly improved recently. Georgia, part of the reason for their success at the Euros, is that too strong a word, but their creditable appearance at the Euros is they've been able to play competitive football. And I think one of the problems that an Andorra or San Marino, even a Georgia or North Macedonia had, was that the vast majority of their games in international football, they're defending. All they're doing is clinging on. So they practice one bit of the game, and if you're playing as a team of the same standard, then obviously you have to attack and defend, and that is it's just better for everybody. So yeah, I agree. I think that has been massively beneficial. It's very hard to quantify, but I think it's been massively beneficial. And I also even like the way that in the Euros you have one place reserved for a League D team, which at first I was worried a bit. That's a little bit like it's almost patronising. It's a bit of a kind of here's sort of a golden ticket you hide in a chocolate bar, and somebody finds it, and it's a bit like Rocky in the first Rocky film, suddenly getting his sort of dream chance. But actually, what it means is, and this kind of builds on what you were saying about Italy and the coefficient declining for Italy and the problems that causes them. One of the issues you have, and I think we saw this with Armenia, 15 or so years ago, they had a really good generation, but their coefficient was so bad that they had almost no chance of qualifying for the World Cup or the Euros, because they were playing in groups with 3 or 4 decent teams there, and even if they were better than 2 of them, they couldn't sort of get through at all. Whereas you sort of circumvent that. It's a bit of a backdoor, but I think it's an acceptable backdoor, and I quite like that as sort of offering a team that's suddenly playing way above the level it has been at an opportunity to get to the Euros.
Gives you a shot at these playoffs as well. That's the other. There's 2 routes now to tournaments from Europe, right? So it's either in your qualifying tables, and Scotland is a team, I think initially that has prospered through this. If you do well in your Nations League group, you get a chance of a playoff game. I think that's how North Macedonia ended up in that match with Italy. And it creates this thing. By the way, it's who do you think came up with the Nations League?
Which individual?
Was it Gianni?
Well, it's not close. It was maybe a bit. Michel Platini. This was Michel Platini's idea, and Gianni is obviously General Secretary. And funny enough, it was a cause of one of the biggest disputes between UEFA and FIFA in this Gianni era. So 2018 in Bogota, there was a FIFA council meeting. Gianni arrives there, dishes out these bits of paper saying, like, this is a contract with an unknown company. I can't tell you. I've signed an NDA. I've got 60 days to do this deal. It's going to be worth $25 billion to world football. And I'm not going to tell you who it's with. You got to let me do it. So UEFA obviously fuming. I don't think Gianni and Shepard talked for a year after that. So that 25 billion was going to be a Club World Cup and a World Nations League. That was going to be. He was like, I think he was thinking, hang on, that's mine. I want to take that with me. So that was kind of underreported at the time with all the Club World Cup stuff, and the money was going to come from SoftBank. It turned out, which had a lot of Saudi Arabian, funny enough, money invested. Money invested in it. Yeah, it was going to be, and teams like Brazil and Argentina, they're watching the Nations League in Europe and seeing these competitive matches, like, hand against the glass a little bit, because they would love a bit of that action.
But I mean, I completely get why FIFA are uncomfortable with it, because it's a power base for UEFA, right? That UEFA now have this viable competition that UEFA nations, certainly the vast majority of them, take seriously. If UEFA were ever to say to FIFA, all right, you will win the votes in the General Council because you have all of Asia, all of Africa, all of CONCACAF, but we don't care because we're going to pluck off Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay. Yes, please, we'll come with that. USA, Mexico are going to follow the money. You only have to take those 5 into the UEFA Nations League, and you have a viable alternative to the World Cup that the rest of the world can't compete with. So I don't think it was conceived as this, but if this was immense cunning by Michel Platini to establish a viable alternative to the World Cup, then it works completely. It's just a little warning to FIFA. We can actually do this quite easily.
Yeah. Funny enough, you mentioned that while this fight was going on, CONMEBOL and UEFA ended up setting an office up here in London. No one's there, but there's an office there just in case. Speaking to your point.
And they invent the Finalissimo or whatever it's called. It was as part of this. So I think those talks, or talks about those talks, happened. Anyway, with us, I think in an unprecedented moment, saying the administrators of football have got something right. let's bring the first half to an end. We'll come back in the second half where we'll be talking about administrators very much getting things wrong. So we'll see you then.
Welcome back to the second half of this episode of Libero. And if you want to, I'm going to repeat this, if you like and want to rate and review us, please do that, because that's really important. Keeps this thing going. I'm Tariq Panja of the New York Times. I'm with James Horncastle of The Athletic and Jonathan Wilson. Guys, big week coming up for the United States. Club World Cup over there. It's been a big week for the US in general, hasn't it? A week before the tournament, we've seen immigration protests in California. 5 of the games are going to be played there in Los Angeles. They've been met with Donald Trump sending out the National Guard. What kind of backdrop is this for a major international tournament, guys?
Well, I think in some ways the biggest worry, I mean, obviously the National Guard being deployed is not good, and we'll see how that develops. But the biggest worry is the travel bans. Absolute bans on people from 12 countries, one of whom is Iran, who have qualified for the World Cup. Now, they have dispensation because they're an elite sporting team, so the legislation doesn't cover them. But I suspect the backroom staff, some of them it may cover and some of them not, and their fans absolutely will not cover. And Gianni Infantino in 2017, before the World Cup in Russia, very clearly said, if there's not visa-free travel for fans, there is no World Cup. Has that gone out the window? Is he going to say that to Trump? I mean, it just seems like a complete double standard. I think quite apart from people being banned from the World Cup or not allowed to travel, and I think I saw that say Colombia, the wait time to get a visa from Colombia to the US now is already longer than from now to the start of the tournament. So it may not be a travel ban, but you're not going to be able to go at the moment, as things stand, from Colombia and get a visa to go to the US. So it seems chaos, and I think even if you're not actually banned, I think a lot of people will feel very uncomfortable about what they're seeing, and I suspect fewer people will travel than otherwise would have done.
Also, I mean, we've been doing a lot of reporting around ticket prices, dynamic pricing, and sort of the ticket prices coming down over the kind of fears that some of these games are just not going to be sold out. It's not something that let's say you're like a River Plate fan or something like that, and you initially looked at the prices of the tickets when they came out and you thought, too expensive for me, I'm not going to go and buy a ticket, I'm not going to go follow the team. In the meantime, you'll have made other plans for your summer. You'll watch River from your beach in Punta del Este or something like that. Or if you then do look at the prices and you think, wow, $38 for me to go and watch River in LA or something. I'd love to do that. I can actually now maybe buy a couple of tickets. The visa process makes it, and the travel bans make it difficult. Even from one of these countries that isn't on the travel ban list. If just my experience from the UK, getting a US visa is a timely, it's a time-consuming thing. It takes 90 minutes to fill out a form. You then have to go and queue. You then have to give away your passport. You get your passport back, sort of in between 5 and 10 days. It's not something that you can just like on the hop just say, actually, you know what, I'm going to book, as you would in Europe, I'm going to book a ticket here and I'm going to go watch a couple of games last minute in Germany. James,
this is the year before the World Cup in the US, Mexico 2026. Most of the games are in the US. I remember covering the Confederations Cup in Brazil in 2013, and the country was ablaze with protest at the time. Tear gas, rubber bullets. I remember the final in the Maracanã Stadium. Brazil ended up winning the Confederations Cup, and they thought, we're on the way, we're going to get that 6th World Cup. We know how that ended. But what I remember is the kind of militaristic nature of the setup. Robocops everywhere, armored cars, and there was tear gas that blew into the stadium. And I thought, when the US was given the World Cup in 2018 in Moscow, I didn't think we'd see imagine scenes like that. But what we're seeing in Los Angeles feels very similar. I mean, we're recording this a few hours after an Australian journalist was shot in the leg by a rubber bullet covering these protests in Los Angeles. Now you're going over there. We're going to do a proper look at this Club World Cup with the guys later in the week. But you're going over there. When you're seeing this stuff, what do you reckon? Do you think, yeah, I'll be fine, or is there any trepidation?
I mean, look, I think. No, it's interesting. I mean, because of the reputation that the US has as being just like, and this goes across many different strands of things. Since the election in November, where before that America was always seen as a stable partner for the economy, stable partner for tourism, stable partner for everything. It's where you could go and do business. It's just reliable. And now that reliability is gone. It's unpredictable. Things change all the time. I would say that, we're not your normal kind of punter who might be going to a World Cup for the first time or a big game for the first time. We've all covered games in countries where things are a little bit ropey. I've just come back from Buenos Aires, where if you go into Boca to watch Boca Juniors, it's quite, that was, I spent more time thinking about that than I've spent time thinking about what experience awaits me in the US, along with all the other things that I think you would normally think about when you are going to the US, which is, ready access to guns that people have, gun laws there. Regardless of what has happened, over the last few weeks or since the Trump administration came in, is always a concern. Where when you go to the States, be it as a tourist, be it on business, be it to cover a tournament.
Tariq, you read a piece yesterday, was it, or the day before, about sort of immigrant groups within the US being nervous about gathering to watch games because they fear that could become a target for the ICE. So, I mean, do you want to sort of expand on that? I mean, I encourage people obviously to go and read it, but if you could sort of summarise that for people, I think that's kind of quite useful.
Yeah, real party atmosphere. Yeah, I mean, this is remarkable, isn't it? This is Trump was obviously elected in November, and then was sworn in the new year in January. And one of the first acts, or one of the first focuses, was on immigration and people who are from diaspora communities whose papers aren't in order. And the US has a lot of these people who are working and in jobs. A lot of them are from all over the world in places that like football. So in this case, in February, Flamengo, Rio de Janeiro-based team, one of the best supported teams in Brazil, has fan groups across Brazil. Across the United States, and they planned. They had these watch parties for big games, and there was going to be a game against Botafogo, the Super Cup, that was going to take place in February, and they were going to have a screening, and they cancelled it. Why do they cancel it? They cancelled it because they thought, hang on a minute, if we bring all of these people here to this bar or this venue, ICE, which is the group that is responsible for immigration in the US, could raid our venue, and we don't want that on our conscience. People's lives could be completely destroyed by dint of coming to watch Flamengo Botafogo at a bar in Boston. Just talking about this is so strange, isn't it? And the thing with the Club World Cup, these guys are really excited about this. Maybe in Europe, in some parts of it, we don't have the same level of excitement. But Flamengo fans are really excited about watching their team play Chelsea, I think, in Philadelphia, and being in the Club World Cup. They had planned to go by bus or traveling convoy and make it's a huge deal for them. They're not going to do any of that now because of this, because of the fears around immigration. Imagine being the guy who has organised this bus, and that's the vehicle that gets stopped by immigration officials, and half the people on that get taken away and sent to jail and deported, or worse. So yeah, this is the atmosphere that's underpinning or around the competition right now for a lot of people.
And to what extent, James, do you think we should look at the Club World Cup as a sort of dry run for the World Cup, in the way the Confederations Cup used to be the dry run for the World Cup? We saw the final of the Copa America in the US between Colombia and Argentina. There were huge problems. People sort of breaking into the stadium for security didn't seem up to scratch. Are you anticipating a reaction to that? And to what extent do you think it's fair to kind of see this as being a dry run for the main event next year?
I think FIFA have been quite explicit about saying that this is a test event for the World Cup because there will be people from all over the world coming. Unlike, for example, last year, where it's the Copa America, where it was mainly South Americans. It was principally South Americans. I think that in itself was already a dry run as well. You mentioned the problems that were there for the Copa America final. FIFA claim that there have been, and the local authorities claim that there have been learnings from that in terms of when they should be opening the gates to allow fans come into the stadiums, the kind of security perimeter as well, all those kind of things. So it'll be interesting to see those come into effect. But it's, again, I found this very odd that America has this almost unchallenged reputation for being the place, the world capital of entertainment, where the stadiums and the infrastructure are the best, world leading. My experience in Italy dealing with American owners is they come and look at the infrastructure in Italy and they're like, this is all falling down, it's terrible. First thing we want to do is actually bring in a modern, first world stadium, so that the fans can have a lovely experience and we can make loads of money. I was shocked by what I saw at the Copa America last year. And I think football fans do pose different challenges to the archetypal American sports fan. Who, do go. I mean, I think we spoke about ticket prices on another Libero. How, ticket prices in the States are much higher than they are for kind of regular sports games in Europe, South America. They attract a different clientele. That clientele wants to be catered for differently than ours do. And it did feel that a year ago when that Copa America final came, that it was a very, they were almost dealing with kind of completely something that they'd never dealt with before, which was curious.
I mean, some of those scenes were extraordinary, weren't they? People climbing through air conditioning ducts and just, I mean, in some sense, if you'd seen that in Colombia or in Argentina, you'd just sort of been, the passion of the South Americans, isn't it marvellous? But you're right. There's something very jarring about seeing that in this country that we sort of see as being, they've absolutely nailed what entertainment is and what the sort of product and the sort of slightly sanitized product should be.
I think partly that was to do a couple of things here. One is trying to maximize profit. So you spend a lot less on security and the perimeter and all of these things. And look, I dare say the other part is commendable. It was their competition, and the people who run the organisation, there's been can't say we've got full confidence in them staging these events, and it seems like they try to do the event organisation part on a shoestring budget in order to carry back as much treasure as they could, after the tournament, and we've seen. The question I also have here is there is different fan cultures. James, you alluded to it with the South American public there, but Jonathan, what if we've got a march of Polish fans through the streets of Kansas or wherever? Or are the police going to understand what's going on, or are they just going to let them rip, boys? We don't want any of this here. This is quite alien to the public then, certainly to the police.
Well, I mean, the honest answer is I don't know. And to be honest, we've seen this in London, where especially when you have German clubs, Bundesliga clubs come to London. Did Arsenal play Köln a couple of years ago? Köln fans had this march from King's Cross to the Emirates. You tell people, hang on, what's going on? What's this? This feels weird. So I yeah. I'm not sure that happens as much with national teams as it does with club teams. But you've also got, and I don't know how this is going to work. Whether there'll be shuttle buses. A lot of these stadiums are they're predicated on you having a car, and there seems to be an acceptance that the drive to the game, a drive away from the game, the atmosphere in the car park, the tailgating and everything. Is that what it's called? Tailgating? Is that the word I'm looking for?
I think that's right. You get your barbecue. I get your grill out.
What do they call it when you drive too close? Is that not also tailgating?
Also tailgating.
Oh god, it's confusing. And that's how alien it is to me. I don't know what the word is for it, but that is not sort of how certainly Europeans and I suspect South Americans experience football. And I think that could be a bit of an issue. There's just the logistics of getting to these grounds that in many cases are quite a long way from city centres.
So what you're saying is the American stadium experience is like the Ryanair booking experience. You're going to Lyon, but you land in Saint Etienne. Try and get there without a car. So this is the situation. So there's a few of these stadiums. San Francisco stadium's not in San Francisco. The Dallas Stadium is in Arlington, and we're going to get to this. Boston is certainly not in Boston. And the other issue with all of these venues, this is a car country. They hate, it seems like, investing in public transport infrastructure. So try to get to these places using buses or trains. You might not make it to kickoff, or you might not get home, one or the other. Do you think some advisories need to? We're doing public service here, aren't we, guys? Really?
Well, should I tell you my Boston story?
Better it.
So this is 2000. I was visiting a mate who was at Harvard. I was in Cambridge, not even in Boston. New England Revolution are playing Chicago Fire tonight. Christos Stoichkov is playing for Chicago Fire. As it turned out, he was injured. He wasn't even playing, which made it even more of a waste of time. But brilliant. I'll go to this game, and this is 2000. So the internet is not as all encompassing as it is now. So I get out a paper map and look for the nearest train station to the stadium, which I discover is in Foxborough, which is a totally different city. And the nearest train station is in a place called Walpole. So I'm with a Norwegian mate, and we get on the little train out of Cambridge, out of Boston, I can't remember, to Walpole. And it's dark. This is, I don't know, I guess it's March time, maybe? The rain's lashing down. It's a terrible night. Get off the train at Walpole. You think, well, yeah, maybe there'll be a shuttle bus from here. Walk out the station, and there's nothing there. There's a road, and there's just a forest. And I was just standing in the middle of this forest with the rain lashing down, thinking, well, how do I get to this game? I don't understand. In the distance, I see kind of a glow. So, okay, there's human habitation, there's a settlement. So I set off down this road, and it felt like about, I don't know, half an hour walk, 20-minute walk. And there's the odd sort of clapboard house, but they're boarded up or like they're obviously deserted. And yeah, it's very Blair Witch. Blair Witch was a big thing back in 2000. The found footage was like the new way of doing things. I was thinking this is, yeah, I'm going to get killed by a witch in a New England wood. This is terrible. And I get to this settlement, Walpole, which I don't know how big it is, but it appeared to be about 2 streets. There's a crossroads in the middle. The Stars and Stripes are half-mast with a Vietnam MIA flag above it, like as if I've just wandered in like 1972 or something. And there's nobody about. It's just deserted. Then I see this guy walking towards us.
John Rambo.
Well, he's got a hunting rifle on his back. He's wearing a hunting jacket. He's got a hat on. I'm like, I mean, this guy's... I find this intimidating, but I'm going to have to speak to him. So I go over to him and go, excuse me, mate, is there... don't suppose there's a bus to the soccer game? I was trying to speak his language, kind of get him on side. And he just looks at me and says, what? I was like, is there a bus to the soccer game? And these appear to be 2 concepts he can't comprehend, either bus or soccer game. It's a fair play to him. He gives me the phone number of a cab company, and I go to this call box, put in some dimes, some quartz, I don't know, whatever you put in.
Amazing.
This cab company, you want to go to the Foxborough Stadium? Where are you? I'm in Walpole. What on earth are you doing in Walpole? Why are you there? I was like, look, let's not worry about that right now. Can you pick me up? Yeah, it'll be half an hour, but yeah, we'll come and pick you up. I said, where should I meet you? And it doesn't matter. If you're in Walpole, we'll find you. So it's still lashing down. So yeah, right, see if I can find like a cafe or like somewhere to get a sandwich or something. Just get out of the rain. So I walk down the street and I see this sort of light, and it's a pizza restaurant, takeaway pizza place. So I go in, and who should be at the counter but the bloke in the hunting jacket? So I'm sort of looking around, and it's sort of on the. So it's all sort of very bright white tiles, and on the wall there's two signed photos, one from Kevin Bacon, one from Marvin Hagler, and they both say something like "Best luck with the Dragons, all the best, Marvin," or whatever. So I had sort of vaguely noted this, and the guy in the hunting jacket says to the lass behind the counter, these guys are journalists. Go and get the manager." So the manager comes out, and he's about 6'6". He's dressed entirely in black. I guess he's mid-50s. Black hair swept back, greying at the temples. It's like Christopher Lee playing a pizza shop manager.
I've got Steven Seagal in my head, by the way. Anyway,
yeah, a bit greyer, a bit less muscular. So like, this is not making me feel any more comfortable about the situation. The guy in the hunting jacket goes, "Show them, the journalists. They want to see. Go and get it." So he goes in the back shop, and he comes out. He's holding this blue plastic box, puts it down on the counter. Then he reaches into his shirt. And I'm like, oh, it's a knife, it's a gun, oh my God, I'm going to die in this godforsaken pizza restaurant in the middle of nowhere. And he pulls out what appears to be an iguana. I later learned this is a bearded dragon. And he reaches in the blue plastic box and he takes out a remote control quad bike. And he drops the bearded dragon on the remote control quad bike. And it knows what it's doing. It grabs the handlebars, like knees clutched into the sides, frowning concentration on its face. And he sort of then drives it up and down the counter, puts it on the floor, and like the bearded dragon appears to be loving it. And he goes, "I was on Letterman with this," and I was like, "What?" Yeah, of course, on Letterman we had a pig under controls, and he gets out his newspaper cuttings, and he's trained a pig to drive bearded dragons on quad bikes, and he went round schools in the area. I think lecturing on evolution, using these bearded dragons as an example. So, this has been remarkable enough. Get me pizza, eat that, quite nice. Taxi turns up, drive to the stadium, get in there just before kick-off. I sit down, guy next to me turns to me, and very friendly, sort of says, "Hi, I'm Ferdy," as if I should know who Ferdy is. I was like, "Oh, nice to meet you, I'm Jonathan." He went, "No, I'm Ferdy." But no, I did. I heard that. I just don't know who you are. And he went, "World record 100 meters backwards." And I was like, seriously, mate, it's just so far from being the most impressive thing I've heard in the last hour that like. But no, he genuinely holds the world record, or held the world record for running 100 meters backwards. He also held the world record for speed keep-ups, the most keep-ups in a minute, and he played professional football on 5 continents. So the videos are there. Ferdiato Adobo, you can find it on YouTube. You can find the most spectacular American local news clip of him running the 100 meters backwards. He's very fast. He's faster than you think possible. So yeah, if you are going to Foxborough and you do find yourself making a mistake going through Walpole, do look out for the Dragons and do look out for Ferdiato Adobo.
Well, idea for a TV program: Ferdy racing the iguana while he's on his little bike or whatever you had him on.
Honestly, Ferdy would destroy him. Ferdy's so quick. You cannot conceive how quick Ferdy... I think it's like 13.2 seconds, something like that. It's staggering.
I don't think anyone can match that story, quite frankly. But my only experience was the Copa America in 2016. There was a game in Boston. I arrived late at night. There was an Airbnb, and the person was being evicted. So I thought that's just awful. This can't get any worse. And then obviously you find out the game isn't in Boston. These stadiums are nowhere near where they're supposed to be. So yeah, if you're listening, this is a massive public service to World Cup visitors. Your stadiums are not in the cities they're they're scheduled to be in. Guys, before we close, we talked about America quite a lot here. Do we treat America differently in terms of coverage? Because everyone's got context about the USA pre-Trump, but we see it as this very, I guess, in our mind's eye, at least, this kind of modern place where things work. And when they were awarded the World Cup in 2018, I think a lot of people were quite excited about this. With Qatar and Russia, obviously the 2 World Cups preceding this, Do you think we're covering it differently, and do you think there needs more focus? Do you think this week with the immigration raids and what's happening in stand has shown perhaps we need to look at the USA in the round rather than like we did Qatar and Russia? Jonathan, sorry, no, James, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's something we're so familiar with, and we are, we are almost, from a cultural perspective as well. There are kind of less unknowns. Everything is, it's part of our culture. It's the kind of cultural hegemony of the US is really powerful in terms of that kind of making a lot of things acceptable and maybe making us overlook certain things. But certainly there are, I think, a number of issues with the US, not only this government, but even before in other administrations, other social issues that, I think when you have a major tournament come, you end up shining a light on those things. Again, anecdotally, to be talking about sort of logistics and experience at a tournament. There was a owner of a football club, US owner, who was sort of talking me through Miami the other day. And again, a lot of the things that he was talking to me about Miami, they brought back memories of Doha. In terms of
the golden thumb.
Well, oh my God, yes. I mean, the golden thumb, you would expect maybe Qatar to throw that in with the plane for Trump. We'll put the golden thumb from the bazaar into into one of the cabins in the plane. But no, a lot of similarities. It's just branded differently, speaks different language, speaks the same language to us. We're much more familiar. When in actual fact, I think there are similarities with some of the more controversial competitions that we've covered than many people would have expected.
I think the problem is always. I think the problem is always with perspective. Yeah, I spent a lot of time in Russia, and so going to Russia in 2018, I was really looking forward to it. I'd never been to Yekaterinburg, I'd never been to Nizhny Novgorod, I'd never been to Kazan, and these were places I wanted to go to. And all the problems that were there. So yeah, but I feel like I've dealt with that before in Russia. It's not actually that big a deal. The riots we see in LA, and we're recording this sort of early afternoon on Monday, so things may change. But if there weren't a World Cup there, would we be really thinking about them? I suspect similar events happen in a lot of countries, get no coverage at all because it's Trump, because of the US. We know about it. It's one thing in a massive country. The chances of you wandering into it as a sort of random visitor at the World Cup are pretty limited. Equally, and one of the things that sort of I've been made uncomfortable by is how many examples we've been given by the media in, actually probably not in the last sort of couple of months, but the couple of months before that, of British, French, German visitors to the US suddenly finding themselves locked up for 3 weeks on the border for either sort of utterly minor breaches of visa protocols, or just sort of the arbitrary decisions of ICE representatives. And again, the actual proportion is tiny, and the chance of it happening to you, one of us, one of our listeners, a random person with a ticket, is probably incredibly low. But it is unsettling. And the truth is that when I go to the couple of nations, I'm probably in far greater danger. Or there's a far greater risk of something going wrong. But it is, those stories do inevitably make you uneasy. And I think what definitely is true is that so many of us were accused of being critical of Qatar for reasons of racism. Basically, we're accused of being racist for pointing out problems in Qatar. I think there'll be a real determination to show that that's not the case. And I think that's where this Club World Cup would be really interesting in terms of highlighting issues that may become bigger stories in the British media and the European media in the 12 months leading up to the World Cup.
Yeah, and you're kind of aware of it. My kind of last thought about this at the moment is, even with Qatar and Russia, those countries, they try to bend over backwards to try and show they aren't who many of us were reporting they were in some respects. I mean, look, all these visitors are welcome. We want the world to come to see us. The posture of the US right now, at least it looks like this, is the World Cup is a celebration of the world. You come here, we'll all join together. At least that's what FIFA is saying. But you've got a host country that seems to not like foreigners. Like, yeah, we're going to host this thing. Don't let the door hit you on the way out, and please leave. It doesn't seem very welcoming. I got a bit of criticism for saying this on social media by someone talking about 6,500 migrant deaths and the treatment of LGBT community, etc. in Qatar. But that wasn't the point I was making. I was saying those countries were trying, despite themselves, to say, please come here. We're going to make you welcome. This one, at least the posture right now and what we're seeing, suggests we don't really like foreigners and we're hosting the World Cup. And there you go. And with that, that's the end of this episode of Libero. There's going to be, as we said, a full look, a preview to the Club World Cup from a footballing point of view as much as anything else later in the week. Please rate and review us and like. And if you have any comments or ideas for things we should discuss, please send us an email at liberopodcast0